Good afternoon. Welcome to 4-4. This is our third edition. Very, very exciting edition today. We have three incredible guests this afternoon. This version of 4-4 is called Water and Time. So the three artists that we have are all people who are working between mediums of time-based things. So, for example, photography, video, performance, but also at the center of their work thematically is the sea, the ocean, bodies of water that have resonance for their personal histories as well as their families and, entire countries and ethnic groups. So this afternoon we have joining us Adama Delphine Fawundu.
Hi.
Deborah Jack. Deborah. Turn on your video, Deborah. Amazing.
All right.
And, I'm probably going to mess this up, but I'm going to try my best. Buhlebezwe, Siwani. Is it good? Buhlebezwe. I just have to get it right. Almost there. Thank you all for joining us again. As usual, we are so grateful to have you here joining us for this discussion. So I'm just going to quickly introduce Delphine. We usually do this in alphabetical order. Actually, I'm sorry, Delphine, I'm not going to introduce you first. Obviously, we all know what's happening right now in the world, what's happening to Black bodies in the world. This week, we've had some pretty significant developments. So, trusty bottle of rum here. We're going to pour a little libation out for the lives that have been lost today, this week, and for the foreseeable future. And again, of course, we're talking about water at the heart of our practices here, of our existence here in the West, period. So we'll pour some out for the ancestors who've allowed us to still be here, who have allowed us to have the fortitude to continue this work for what is yet to come as well. So that said, and we'll probably end up talking a lot about that specifically, I imagine. So Delphine, Adama Delphine Fawundu is a photo-based visual artist born in Brooklyn to parents from Sierra Leone and Equatorial Guinea in West Africa. She received her MFA from the Columbia University School of Visual Art. Ms. Fawundu is also a co-author of the book Mfon, Women Photographers of the African Diaspora. She's also a 2016 New York Foundation of the Arts Photography Fellow. Her recent works investigate the spiritual, cultural, and ideological pre-colonial ways of being that were disrupted by voluntary immigration, colonialism, and distorted within the African diaspora through oppressive systems stemming from the transatlantic slave trade. Fawundu uses photography, video, sculpture, and printmaking to create new trans-historical identities as she explores Afrofuturist ideas. Her works have been exhibited in institutions, including the Brooklyn Museum of Art, International Center of Photography, BRIC, the Brighton Photo Biennial, Lagos Photo Festival, and the Museum of Contemporary Photography, Chicago. She got a real long bio, y'all, so I'm gonna
all that stuff. They can go to the website.
Yes. Well, you'll put your website link in the chat. Also, as usual, I encourage you to chat in the chat box. We love a lively chat here. Also, screenshots, tag us. Thank you. Go ahead, Delphine.
Okay. Wait, am I saying something? Wait, I can't.
Yeah, I know. You're going to talk about just your work at large. If you would like to share images or anything with us, you're welcome to. So in general, we're just going to kind of start with you all talking about your practice, what led you into this kind of work, how you work through all of these ideas, how water plays a role in your work, etc.
Okay. All right. So thank you all for being here, especially during this, very turbulent time in our world. I'm grateful for conversations like this with other artists, especially like-minded people where we get to share and at least build, thinking about the future. So I'll share some of my work as, of course, this whole series is centered around us using water. For me, water came into my work organically. Like I kind of realized that it was there without actually saying I'm going to make work in reference around water. I'll share with you. Oh, my screen is disabled. I can't share. Niama. Okay. So I'll share with you one of the first series that, you'll see the absence of water, but water is definitely present in this series. And it's an excerpt from one of my very early series where I include performance through photography. Here I'm embodying a Mende woman who appeared on the Nat Turner plantation. So this photograph was actually taken in Southampton, Virginia, on the plantation that Nat Turner was born on. I did this series in 2014, and this was really early on in me pointing the camera at myself. So I think about water as this carrier, as this body, as this memory, this thing that remembers our world, but also as a nurturer and a giver of life, right? We all started in water. We all, our first existence was in a body of water. In this particular photo here, like I'm just thinking about the earth. And again, my face was actually buried within the grass and it was wet. Like the first thing that I felt was water on my face, So again, like I wasn't thinking about water now, but as I go through my work, I'm thinking I was always thinking about water. Even the gown that I'm wearing was hand dyed by my grandmother from Sierra Leone and then given as a gift to my mother, who now I use the dress to perform various different things in. So again, here we are, this process of batiking to transform things. And I'm thinking about those identities, like water also is a transformer. And we even think of the essence of water, how it transforms into air, is solid. It does all of these, it has these transformative properties. And I think of that in terms of our identities and the legacy of our identities as we move through the diaspora, move through the world, and even on the continent, with these things that were put in place, these structures and systems that were put in place to disrupt our identities, but yet we proceed and we move and we grow and we continue, because that's what we do as people of African descent. Here's another series, same gown, way later, 2017 is when I made this series from passageways. Again, thinking about, what is passed down from generation to generation. And there's so much more to this. I mean, but if you see now, I intentionally put water at the base of this photograph in a symbolic way. One of the things that I've done is a short film that I call The Cleanse, and this is an excerpt from that film. And this is one of the first times that I actually used video in my work, and I will show you an excerpt of that in a second, but I'm just going to quickly go through again, like how this idea of water has played a way in, has presented itself in my works, in my photography. Here we have this mask, and I keep looking at this, and every time I look at this photo with different people, we come up with different things. And I don't really like to define meanings, one meaning behind my work, because it's so layered. But here we could go through more. And I think about also as we travel throughout the diaspora, this photograph was made in Argentina, again, thinking about societies that has said there's no African presence here. As Argentina said, the president roared that, when in fact the heritage of Africans in Argentina is actually rich. So it was important to me. So one thing that I do is I embody this spirit, this water deity. I think about Mami Wata often. I think about Yamaya often. I think about, many river goddesses often as I embody different entities and beings to perform work. I'm usually constructing masks, and because masks are very present in my culture as a Mende person from Sierra Leone, and thinking about the power in that. So I'm always coming from a place of power in the midst of chaos, because that's what we have to move on. Here's an installation piece from one of my shows. Again, here's this idea of masking, but then water is present as well. And I'll just quickly show you a clip of The Cleanse, which is the first film that I actually used to present this idea of water. I came up with this idea after doing some research based on this book by Sylvia Arden Boone. It's called The Radiance of Waters, and she is a very well-revered anthropologist who actually does it in the right way. We know the problems with anthropology, but she did a beautiful dissertation and study while she was at Yale University, where she actually went and visited so many different Mende women, and we're talking about feminine ideals of beauty within Mende culture. And that book just made me think about water as a transformative piece, but then also water as something that gives us power and gives us the power to transcend all of these isms. And
there are three that bear witness in earth, the spirit, and the water, and the blood, and these three agree in one. Sent down from time to time, water from the sky in due measure, and we raise to life therewith a land that is dead. Even so will you be raised from the dead.
I'm gonna move forward because I know we don't have, I don't want to take up all the time, but I'll just show you like the,
And I loved her. I found God. I love.
This is one of my favorite quotes. So we'll listen to
there is neither time nor place for us here, unless we create it. I found God in myself, and I loved her. I found God. I loved her fiercely. I loved her. I loved her fiercely.
And I know that hair is very present. Hair is something I use in my work, but in this work, but it's definitely way more than hair is what I'm talking about with The Cleanse. And so, I mean, the video ends like this, you just stare at her doing this thing, and then, that's it. But that's what I'll share now so that everyone else has a chance to talk about their work. So that's me.
Thank you so much for starting us off. Deborah, you ready? Deborah Jack is a conceptual artist whose work is based in photography, video, and sound installation, painting, and text. Her work has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions in the Caribbean, the United States, and Europe. Her work is currently on view at the Perez Art Museum of Miami in the exhibition The Other Side of Now, Foresight in Contemporary Caribbean Art. In fall 2020, she will present a 15-year survey exhibition at Pen and Brush in New York City, Group exhibitions include the traveling exhibition, Relational Undercurrents, Contemporary Art of the Caribbean Archipelago, which opened at the Museum of Latin American Art in Los Angeles, the Sugar Hill Children's Museum of Art and Storytelling, the Frost Museum at FIU, and Portland Museum in Maine. Her work has been exhibited at the 2014 Site Santa Fe Biennial at Brooklyn Museum, the Jersey City Museum, the Caribbean Cultural Center of African Art Diaspora Institute, and Art Space New Haven. Residencies include Lightwork and the Big Orbit Gallery Summer Residence. Deborah, I'm so excited for you to join us. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm gonna mute myself and you can do your thing.
Hi, thanks for having me here. I just want to share the same sentiments as Adama. I'm grateful for this conversation in this time because it's just been a crazy week all around. And so, but you know, so this space is a really welcoming and a space that I feel welcomed into. So I guess my work and my, you know, the relation with water is really, I don't know, I almost can't remember a time when I didn't use it, I guess. But I did come to it organically. I went to graduate school in Buffalo, New York. And at a time, I was sort of trying to think about what were the things that connected me and grounded me. I came to using the sea in the water by way of hurricanes, actually. And so, and thinking about the Atlantic and the water that hurricanes traveled across. And so I had gone through a Category 5 hurricane in 1995. And 5 years later, I remember writing down in a book at the time, we was just sort of sitting and waiting. It was like 700 miles across. It was huge, Hurricane Lewis. And I wrote a note in the book and I looked at my brother and I said, you know, this is slaves' revenge. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, as you know, and you're inundated with maps, right? You're looking at TV, you're tracking a storm. And I said, yeah, look, see, it's leaving the coast of Africa and it's coming to the New World. And I said, and that's the Middle Passage in between. And I just wrote it down and then I forgot it. And then, you know, you got caught up in the storm itself and the aftermath. But I remember also thinking about a lot of people reporting after that they heard voices in the wind and, you know, the way the winds were. So when I get to Buffalo, like 5 years later and sort of going through my notes and I realized, oh wait, you know, this is an idea that I can sort of really delve into. And so I started using, thinking about the storm, thinking about it as a vortex, as a form of a season. I had read Derek Walcott's book, essay about fragments of Antillean memory and that notion that the Caribbean didn't have seasons. And so for a lot of art historians and theorists and philosophers, that meant that the region wasn't capable of depth because we didn't go through 4 seasons. And that, in fact, the region had lots of seasons. You had dry season, rainy season, mango season, different seasons. And so I started thinking about that idea of seasons and then also memorial, right? Thinking about the bodies lost in the Middle Passage and in lots of cultures where if someone dies an unjust death, the soul doesn't rest. And so it swirls around. And I said, well, this is a vortex of bodies to me. And so to me, that was nature making a space for trauma. And when we think about trauma, like these days, like, you know, think about the way we feel in this week and think about that quantified, right? And then through generations. And so, and we can barely contain it in our bodies, right? And so for me, it felt like this was a vortex that came, you know, there's always this season, June to November. And so, but then also thinking about what feeds the hurricane is the sea, right? This idea that like the rain in a hurricane is salt water. So, you know, this connection of the ocean being sucked up and then rain back down on us. And so for me, I started making the connection as well to the colonial history of St. Martin, where I'm from. And St. Martin was colonized by the Dutch because of salt. They wanted to use our natural salt pond because in that time, salt meant power, right? You had all this strength as you sail the ocean, you could sail longer. It preserved, at one point it was worth more than gold, right? So here's this little island in the Caribbean that's been colonized. And so I started making the connection between the salt in the pond, the salt in the sea, and the salt in the hurricanes. And that's sort of where my work is sort of an intersection of always sort of playing with this idea of our connection to water and then to land, right? Because there is this landfall and this sort of intersection as well. So my more recent work too then starts to think about the shoreline. And so when I show the videos, for me, the shore becomes this site is a site of intersection. And it's also a space that has this sort of duality, and more than a duality, but it's a space that navigates multiple sites. It's a site of departure and a site of arrival, and it sort of just depends. So I like that vibration of that space. And for me, that echoed what salt meant, right? Salt is something that corrodes, but also preserves. And so again, here's this material that can do both. It can eat away at metal, and it can preserve meat. And so I like that sort of tension where something is both and, as opposed to sort of these binary constructs that we've been given about, either or. And so I'll just start looking at some images really quick before I just keep talking. So my earliest photo work, I'll just show that really. I don't think it's letting me share my screen. Is it? I don't know if you, are you sharing? Are you seeing my screen? Okay, that's weird. Okay, there it is. And so this body of work, which looks like it's sort of dealing with, it's looking again, this girl is clutching this bouquet of flowers. It's called When the Value of Our, what is the value of water if it doesn't quench our thirst for, and then ellipses. And so again, I was thinking about the seasons and the seasons that nature generates. These flowers are flamboyant flowers. They bloom in July and August. And so she's sort of taking these flowers through the landscape from the center of the island to the coast. And so she keeps navigating in this narrative that I've constructed, this sort of interior space of the island, and then going to sort of the shoreline and this sort of this back and forth. So when I made this piece, it was sort of this idea of ritual. St. Martin is a small island, it's 37 square miles. So at any given point, you're very much aware of the edges of your space. And so I think about what it means to live on an island and to be aware of the edges of the land that you inhabit. That doesn't happen when I live in the US, for instance. And so this young woman is sort of, ancestor and descendant at the same time, navigating and moving through this space, taking this bouquet of flowers like an offering to the coastline. And so just to sort of show that this sort of earlier introduction of salt, in a way, of the water and the coastline. I'm just showing up like a little parts of pieces, otherwise it's a lot. So I just wanted to show a more recent work, which is then the show at the Perez Museum, the installation there, because I think it kind of speaks a little bit to the times that we're living in, where I sort of get this sense that there's sort of this general assault on Black bodies and colonized bodies. And so in St. Martin, for instance, during this COVID-19 era, we've been wrestling with the notion of the border, even after hurricanes, when the Dutch sort of come into the island and they want to create order. St. Martin is half French and half Dutch, or part French, part Dutch. And the border is open, but then whenever these sort of colonial powers sort of try to assume power, the first thing they do is try to, it's a recent thing, to try and shut the border down. So I'm playing this because right now we're having this sort of issue again on the island. So I decided to show this clip. And so when you look at it, you'll see, let me just press play. So it's installation that's 3 channels, 3 videos. But it's the sea and that sort of shifting block of water that happens throughout the image, for me, sort of represents this idea of the border, but it's also the shoreline is there. But then there's also this sort of moving shoreline and a shifting border that's happening as well. So this installation is using partly the sound of an old Methodist hymn that's sort of slowed down and dragged out. And I'll just let it play for a bit. So it's also to this idea of trying to put like sort of this rigid controls on an organic sort of object or thing, right? And so that notion of always trying to control these sort of spaces where we live and sites that we navigate is something that I started thinking about in the work. And just really quick, because there's also one of the things that I do use, an element that's part of the sound for me is something called the Rosby whistle. And the Rosby whistle is I've been using it in most of my more recent video work. And that's basically some scientists discovered that the Caribbean Ocean is emitting this hum that can't be heard by human ears, but it's audible in outer space. Satellites can pick it up. And I was really excited when I learned about it and decided to use it as part of what I was thinking about. Kamal Brathwaite talks about the Caribbean archipelago and the sort of that all the islands are sort of like the tips of mountains, right? And so I was always already thinking about this idea too of what happens underneath the ocean and the connection of all the islands underneath the water. So the sound that you're hearing in the piece is that, the Rosby whistle. And I'll stop here for now and then we'll can always continue. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Deborah. Yeah, I honestly was like almost in tears at some points of that. So really, thank you so much for that. And next we have Buhlebezwe Siwani joining us from Amsterdam by way of South Africa. I'm super excited to have her here with us today and sharing about her incredibly varied and interdisciplinary practice. Thanks, Buhle. Go on. You have to unmute yourself.
I just unmuted myself. Okay, do I not have a bio?
You know what? You're right. I was so excited that I like completely missed it. So pardon me. You are so right. Buhlebezwe Siwani was raised in Johannesburg due to the nomadic nature of her upbringing. She also has lived in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal. Siwani completed her BFA at the Wits School of Art in Johannesburg in 2011 and her MFA at the Michelis School of Fine Arts in 2015. Siwani works predominantly in the medium of performance and installations. She includes photographic stills and videos of some performances. She uses the videos and stills as a stand-in for her body, which is physically absent from the space. Thematically, Siwani's work interrogates the patriarchal framing of the Black female body and Black female experience within South African context. As Isengoma, Siwani has also used her artistic practice to delve into religious subjects and the often perplexing relationship between Christianity and African spirituality. Siwani currently lives and works between Cape Town and Amsterdam. Thank you again, and take it away. I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay, I just wanted to say, reiterate what Delphine and Deborah had said, which is thank you everybody for joining us and thank you so much for this moment and for the moment of your time. So I know that the theme is water and time. So my work is very much entangled with how the spirit engages with African belief systems, and a lot of the healing that happens in, I think, our belief systems and how we kind of commune with ourselves and our ancestors is through water. So this is where, like, you know, rituals take place in water, you get baptized in water, etc. And there's so much about water that humans don't know in the physical. But I believe, and lots of people who are Isamo and spiritual healers believe, that they are people who own the water. They are entities which were physical at some point, but are now living in a spiritual realm, who own the water. And if you are to ask for space and to commune, you would drop in like a cent or some money, but it should never be brown, gold, whatever. It should always be like silver. And this is like something that I wanted to interrogate when I began doing my master's. So basically I would start with performance work, and I would let the work kind of decide for itself whether it wants to be a photograph, a video, or just a live performance. I made my first video in 2015, which is what I'm going to show you, which was during my master's. And the title of the video is called Buhlebezwe. Buhlebezwe is basically, it means, it's a term for someone who is no longer, who is in between, who's in a liminal space, so between the physical and the spiritual. So they live in this liminal world and they traverse these two spaces. And I made this video when I went back home. My uncle was chief. My uncle is chief, but his father was chief of a village in South Africa, in the Eastern Cape. And he got this dam built, but the dam, because there was a lake and nobody could take any water from this lake, so he got this dam built. The dam is about almost the same size as the lake, but there had been an influx of tourists, etc., who, when they passed by the lake, my grandfather would be like, just go into the dam. They didn't do that. The reason why nobody actually swam in the lake and why he got this dam built was because people were dying in this lake. Nobody knew how deep it was, nobody knew what was in there, but there had been sightings of whatever. But the main thing is that when tourists used to come, they always used to be like, okay, I'm gonna go into this water without an inkling of, there's a reason why these people who live here don't dare walk in. It's not about fear, it's just that there's a powerful entity there that is beyond them, I guess, in a manner of speaking. So I decided to shoot a video in the lake, which is just opposite it, in the village of Nonibe. And it's one of the few villages that's named after a queen, after a Xhosa queen, because, you know, queens don't exist now or something like that. But anyway, so here is the video and I'll explain more about it. It has no sound, so I'll just continue chatting. So what I'm wearing is it's a Xhosa word, but ingliyo, which is a traditional outfit for girls who are about to go into female initiation, which isn't done anymore because the government has kind of outlawed it. Well, it was the Western government that outlawed it, but it's slowly been coming back into effect in some places. So ingliyo is worn by young girls and unmarried women. And what I have on the rest of the body, the white, is imbola. And it's a signifier for people who are in transition. So these people are not to be touched. And they're known as spiritual beings or just going through something. So I have also a deep fear of the water, but that also has to do with something that is ancestral. water just seems to want to drag, and I have a deep fear of drowning in water or just never coming back. So you'll see at the end of the video, I'll just give you a moment to watch the rest of it. It's just a minute long. And yeah, that is the video, but it stemmed from a couple of pieces that I had made prior to that, which were kind of facing my fear, and in thinking about the bodies that go into water and all the rituals that one has to actually partake in when going, and how to kind of traverse water. Yeah.
Well, that was absolutely incredible. So now we have quite a few minutes left. I do want to make sure that we're taking some time to talk across all of your practices together. I think for me, as I encounter all of your work, one of the really critical things is just how much, when I see it, I perceive this sense of knowing, this like deep sense of knowing yourself, of knowing who you are and where you come from. And I just wonder about how much of that is something that you find through the work also, but something that you come with. Does that make sense? Whoever wants to answer first. And also, of course, as usual, questions and answers will be taken. So please, if you have questions, drop them in the Q&A box.
Yeah. For me, I feel like over the past, maybe this is 2020, so maybe over the past 6-7 years, my work has been a spiritual initiation for myself, just a personal growth spiritually. As I said, most of it is, it gives me information about myself and my understanding of this world, which is forever changing, and my understanding continues to grow. Even someone in the comments asked something about, you know, how does this water, like we're all engaging with water, and how does it relate to what's happening today? And something that I've been thinking about is just the role of us taking care of our earth. Like our indigenous spiritual beliefs, regardless of wherever you are in the world, always had to do with caring for the earth and caring for this body, like the two gifts that we are given from this great creator. We have this physical body and the earth that we are to care for. And it's been making me think about that more and more and more, even in a practical way. You know, how do I do in challenging myself and with those two duties, despite all of these things, these systems and all of these things that are put in place to do the exact opposite, which just tampers with our beliefs, right? Because if we just go by the way of the world, then God is money, money is God, right? And I don't believe that. So I feel like through making work, I'm able to continue to question and learn and grow and learn and grow and question and learn and grow and question again and again and again. And so, yeah, that's what it is for me. And share, of course, share and build community at the same time.
I guess it's the same for me too, in the sense of the work teaches me, right? I feel like, you know, as an artist, I'm always telling people, well, work makes work, right? You have to sort of engage with it. But, you know, for me too, I think usually it's me traveling between the space of the United States and St. Martin, and sort of that back and forth. it sort of forces me like to think about that negotiation of the body, right? And so a lot of times I'm working from the space that I know, which is St. Martin, and then I come back up here, and then I'm usually editing the work and I'm looking at it again. So I'm usually looking at it then from a perspective of nostalgia and of distance. And I'm kind of grateful for that, because like whenever I try to really process all of it in the space that I'm in St. Martin, does not work, right? And I don't know if it's just, you know, like the energy is just different. And so very early on, I was like, okay, part of my practice is to sort of, you know, collect the images, collect the sound, and then work from this other space, which, you know, and maybe that's that notion of like personal exile, you know, sort of working from some sort of like cultural exile in a way, with the work. But all the sort of ideas I feel like I've come to in the work have come from just dealing with it. You know, like I was already filming waves and thinking about abstraction and water when the Rosby whistle came to me, right? And then I put that in it. So it was, you know, it's been probably about 15 years of just making work that sort of includes water or the notion of it. And so it builds that way, right? And so, yeah, so that's the relationship for me in terms of the work. Like it teaches me a lot of the times. And then just in wanting to know more about what those, you know, those questions are, it leads me then to do more research and to learn more. And that's partly rooted to in this initial idea I've always had to in thinking about rememory, Morrison's notion of rememory, that it's a memory, it's something that's happened in the past that needs a way out. So when I started to come up with these ideas about hurricanes and slaves and thinking about that, like for me, that was somebody's idea that needed like time, right? And then it came to me, like I'm not thinking like, oh, this is like, I'm really like clever. I just think it's sort of this energy. And she writes about that, Morrison, that memory is this sort of energy that travels right through time and space. And that even thinking about, you know, water, and that water has a memory, right? So that when there's a flood, it's not that the area gets flooded, it's that the water remembers where it used to go, right? And goes back to that. So all those things, you know, you think of it and you just, you know, you get goosebumps and you go like, yeah, that's what the work is telling me. And so those, you know, those things are always kind of rich. And it's, you know, even when, you know, Adama was just saying too, like you think about the work in the context of what's happening today and you go like, oh, well, it's not obviously political, right? At the same time, like you're making something that's really relevant to the, you know, the madness. And I think about, you know, that notion of ritual, right? And cleansing, and that you have to sort of like protect yourself, right? And that water as protection. And I have the same fear as well. Like everybody who knows me knows I do not like to go on boats. I have a healthy respect for water. Like I feel like I could drown and be swept away easily. When I'm filming or when I'm on a boat, I'm at most not at ease, right? And I remember like people would tease me, and like I always tell my family, is like, I just feel aware of how big the ocean is. Like, you know, the fact that that's a really big cruise ship means nothing to me. That's not big. Like, you know, within the scope of the water, it's just not big. So, so yeah, so there are all those sort of ideas are always sort of, you know, floating around. You know,
if I can, I'm thinking about, I know you and I have talked about this before, Deborah, and I think to some degree, both Delphine and Buhlebezwe as well, thinking about this idea of water, thinking about particularly Christina Sharp's In the Wake. Mm-hmm. Of course, Dion Brand is also really connected with that. And it's just all, of course, Walcott, Glissant, like all of this idea that, particularly what I'm thinking about, I'm sorry, I'm struggling a little bit. What I'm thinking about is this idea of like the half-life of water that Sharp mentions, and this idea that like the body then disintegrates, the energy of that doesn't go anywhere, it's just in the water. And as you said, like what does that mean? What are the implications of that, particularly in the Caribbean? For me as a person of Caribbean descent, I'm always thinking about that, particularly as it relates to climate change and all of these things. This is something that I think about a lot. Okay, I'm sure you had something to say because you unmuted yourself. Go ahead.
Me? About what, Niama?
I thought you looked like you had something to say. Just with regard to that question about, does that knowing, I mean, for you, I feel like that knowing is like, you just know. And the way that you were raised, maybe a part of that because of those close connections to that.
Water.
Yeah. And just how it presents in your work and just.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, so for me personally, making this type of work, because it's so personal to me and it's about my own journey, has always been so difficult in speaking about how this journey and water are so intertwined. I think at a moment, Deborah said it, and I think then it just hit me that water has a memory. But then you remember that previous bodies who are also a part, that make up a part of who you are, also have these memories. And when then it's you and your body relates to these things, and then you come into contact with this other, power, they come together, and it's just, the memory just, yeah, it's a little bit hectic. And I think in the context of South Africa, where we were spatially, we were moved according to race, and that only ended like 22 years ago, but it's still, I mean, Black people still have to have constant access, easier access to beaches which are more dangerous, which is where I normally go and I take photos. But funny enough, only when there's certain other people who come there to do whatever, they get swept away. So I also think like it's the water's revenge. Like the people in the water are just saying it's enough. So I just, this relationship is really, it's a difficult one. In my mind, I think I just pocketed it as something subaltern, and it just happens to manifest itself in how I make a video or take a photograph eventually. I don't know, does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I think about when you were walking in the water, because I know that you were going through a moment in that space, because I know when I'm in those spaces, you feel it. And you can't really describe what you feel when you're in those spaces using your body to make it work. And you're actually physically interacting with the earth, with the water, with whatever's around you. There is something spiritually going on.
Yeah.
Sometimes beyond you to articulate. And you don't even get to see what it is until after you're now, like you're saying, Deborah, especially going back and forth. Like I know with me, I travel to so many different places because I feel like this memory is in so many different places, and it could be somewhere that you've never been before in your life. But a part of you is now, and I think because a part of all of us could connect, but it's just you actually making that first step to connect that allows you open up yourself to the connection and exchange of energy, and then you feel it within the moment. And there's something, like it gives me goosebumps. Like I'm looking at all of your works, getting goosebumps.
That was my goal. Yeah. So I do want to make sure that we get to some of the questions that are posed here. But before we do that, love y'all. I appreciate you being here. There was something in particular that I kind of just lost it, but I'm going to try to get back to it. Just this idea of how all of you are thinking about spirit and thinking about your own body in connection to that. I know Delphine, with the first body of work that you showed, A Mende Woman, you kind of just talked around it with what you just said in terms of thinking about those spaces and how you allow yourself to feel something or not. And I just wonder about, for each of you, how much of that is like something that you feel like you can manage? And are you feeling like as you go deeper into doing things where you're in site-specific situations, how has that been challenging from place to place and from project to project?
Well, I think it depends, right? Because I mean, there's early video pieces that I have where And even like some photo projects, when a lot of my early work was dealing with the notion of memory and history on St. Martin, and how when an island uses, when its main industry is tourism, what happens to the cultural memory of a place, right? What are the things that you elevate and sort of what are palatable for tourists, right? And what part of history is not. And especially if you're a small place, then you're like, oh, you know, like, let's just cover up this insurrection over here. Or this plantation is now a lovely hotel. Or we'll just let this field grow over. And so when I started taking photos and making some of those earlier videos, I would sort of stop at places that, you know, like I would be in the space, and every now and again, there'd be spaces that I sort of connected to on some level that made me say like, okay, like, where can I go film? I'm gonna go to this particular spot, climb up the hill a little bit and go into this corner and film. And then later on, like hearing stories about that place, right? And not questioning that and just sort of going like, okay, then that's, you know, wherever, you know, that impetus, again, thinking about rememory, that impetus to go and photograph in a particular spot that just looks like a field or some area of bush, that there is this sort of like, you know, thinking about land as witness, right? And that in a lot of these spaces, there's so much that's buried in the land itself, whether it's artifacts that we recognize as artifacts or not, whether it's like, you know, and I'd always talk about these sort of small atrocities, right? Because in a lot of times you think of like these sort of large wars and things that are publicized, but then there are all these like small, you know, tiny atrocities that have taken part in history that haven't been written about, right? And so I think those sites have a spirit. I think those sites have like something that want to be said, and there's an energy. Like it's not like part of a spiritual practice per se that I follow or believe, like, you know, like have that I practice. But I respect that, right? I respect the fact that this site is saying like, film here. This is a space I grew up in my whole life. But why do I keep coming back to this? And why do I want to photograph an area that really isn't like photographic, right? In terms of like, well, this is a really beautiful location. And most of the places where we live, there's all this beauty in the landscape, right? And, you know, it, to me, especially like in the Caribbean region in Africa, like all these sites are sites of trauma, but they're also the same sites for healing, right? And that those spaces live together. The site of trauma is a site of healing. You have to return. So, you know, those are the things then that made me go like, okay, if a site resonates, then I'm gonna go photograph and film there. Yeah. So there is a spirit.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I'm gonna start diving into questions. We have a really, I think, lovely question from Jennifer Oladapo. Sorry about that. Obviously, I am struggling a lot today. Forgive me, friends. The conversations between artworks can be really powerful. I'd love to know, one, whose work do you see yours in conversation with, and or two, something you might take away from this brief encounter with each other's work and insights today?
That's a nice question.
Okay.
No, you go.
I don't think it's necessary to see your work in somebody else's or in conversation with necessarily. I think it's important to see your work as your own, devoid of somebody else first and foremost. Then, you know, work is very subjective. It's never objective. And somebody's work might look the same but has no similar meaning at all, etc. So for me personally, that's not a conversation I'm going to engage in because I'm not ready for that. Right now, I'm trying to look exactly at what I'm doing and what I'm busy with because there's so many things that haven't been dealt with spiritually in South Africa right now. So I'm not at that point yet. Like, for instance, why are white women allowed to paint pictures of pretty flowers and I'm not at art school? You know, I'm not about to delve into that. I'm not about to, because it kind of, for me, there's this idea, especially with gallery systems, that it breeds competition within people who are making same kind of subject matter. And if I buy into this, oh yeah, we can be in conversation with each other right now, then I'm buying into this idea and the system that they've built, that they're going to pit Black women against each other and pit the same people with the same subject matter into one whole thing. We're all different. So whoever wants to conversate with anybody can do so as they please. It's up to whoever wants to, really. And what am I going to take away from this brief encounter with each other's work and insights today? Everything. Deborah and Delphine are super smart. So I'm just here,
I'm just sucking it all up.
gagging.
Very grateful for this.
So there's not, first of all, to be in this panel is amazing for me. So I'm gagged. I'm gassed up.
Same here. Yeah.
And you should all be gassed. You deserve to all.
Yeah, no. I was excited when I saw who the other panelists were, and I was just like, oh, this is great. I've always wanted to know more. So and to have the conversation.
Yeah.
But I think but even thinking about the fact that we have these that there is moments of intersection, but everybody has their sort of own particular take on it, and I agree, it is sort of like lazy viewing, right? Like if you look at the work and you're like, oh yeah, like water, this is but the nuance, like everybody's, like I see everybody's work as sort of like existing as its own whole, and even thinking about knowledge, right? You were saying that like we're smart, but I think your work is brilliant, right? It's like what are the forms of knowledge, right? We're not necessarily thinking in sort of like only an academic space, but that this making, that process, you going into the water, thinking about like the lake and the history around the lake and the way the stories and how that has modified the behavior of the people in your village, and how you respect that, right? And that story that comes through your father's telling of the story about the lake, like that's all knowledge, right? And that's an intellectual space that doesn't always get named as that, but that's totally what it is. So yeah, so when I read, it's like reading a book that I really like looking at your work is great. Like, and just even doing like, I like to research. I'm a Googler. So I went in and I was like, oh, I don't know this work. I don't know that one, so that was good for me.
I think you both said it well, like in terms of everyone has their perspective, and this is my reading right now. I feel like I just got a nice big chunk of knowledge that now I could go investigate more or read more about. It's almost, I feel like as artists, we're an open way to a whole bunch of knowledge that you could go and find out about. Just come and look if you dare to investigate more. And I also agree about, I don't often think about being in conversation with other artists because it's such a personal thing. Like you're in this personal headspace and you're just figuring things out, and sometimes you don't even know what in the world you're making until after you look back at it. But one thing I know I am often thinking about in terms of the arts, things that inspire me are usually books, like books upon books. I have a whole bunch of them here. Books. I love books, right? And also music. For some reason, music. I mean, sometimes a song. It just sparks so many things, and my mind is just going all over the place. So music really inspires me to just create, Yeah.
I recently did a collaboration with some 3 opera singers, and I've actually got the song here, but I'm going to make a video for it.
I love it. Yeah.
So, but I wanted to say
you're not
last answer for Jennifer.
You're not gonna bless us. I feel like you just.
I might at the end. It might be a goodbye. You know what I mean?
Okay. Also,
I just wanted to say.
Hold on. It's 2. I just want to make sure everybody's okay with continuing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I just wanted to say that I have worked with other artists, and my work has been in conversation with other artists because I was in an 11-woman collective, Black woman collective. So, and we did documenta, we did a whole lot of stuff. So it's not like it's put a pause. I don't want to do any of that stuff. Like Delphine said, it's very personal. It's super personal. So, yeah. That's what I wanted to say.
Amazing. You guys are so great. And I'm so appreciative that you agreed to do this. Thank you, Jennifer, for that question. Hey, Ivan Ford has a question. Can you talk about water as a liberating force? Water's connection to liberation in the historical, artistic, and/or spiritual sense. I also see your little baby here on the side, Delphine. I didn't see it before.
The water did that now. No, I love that question about water as a liberating force. I think that's what I was thinking about with the cleanse. It just does all, it's just so much, it's so much when it comes in contact with the body. But then you think about the idea, some energy, your energy chose to be here. So that was like one in how many millions, right? And you chose to be here, and your first, and like I said, like this, we were birthed in water, right? And I think that that's freedom. And we're free within the confines of this. We're still free. Whether you acknowledge it or not is up to you. And so like I think about, as you were mentioning before I mess up your name, I'm sorry. Well, I mess up your name, you said something that was so on point about the rituals and the cleansing. Like I grew up with all of my my traditions were centered around water. I knew, like, I was like, are we doing a libation today? Because there's too much going on in the world right now. And it opens up the way. So I was raised to know that cleansing and rituals around water opens up the way. Mm-hmm. And that's liberating as well. So it's a part of this language of how I understand my being, and moving forward is about that interaction with this part of energy, which is us, which is everything. Like it's all, I feel like we're all just different representations of one thing. And right, so water is one of them, earth, fire, all of these different things. So yeah, so that's how I think of it as a liberating tool, is this ability to understand its energy and then use it in your favor. Because just as you were saying, Deborah, there's a double fold. It could kill you and it could give you life at the same time, right? And that's the beauty of it. We could fear it and love it. We know we could fear it, but we know we need it. And we are it. And all of that exists at the same time. And I think understanding how to navigate all through that is what life is. And there's a certain level of freedom to that. The hardest thing to be is to be free in this state of world that we are in right now. But people knew they were free even during the height of slavery.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Are either of you going to take on this question, or?
Oh, I just thought Adama answered it so well. I was like, okay, we're done.
That's okay.
Yeah,
we still have like 10 other questions to get to.
Yeah, no, good questions here. So.
Thank you all so much for your time. We're gonna keep going. Let's see. There's a great question that Jasmine asked. I don't see it anymore somehow. Oh,
what way do you protect the sacredness of the spirituality within your work in predominantly white institutional spaces?
There it is.
I can take this one. You know what, to be honest, I feel like we choose to make the work, and we choose to show what we want to show and hide what needs to be hidden. Because if you're going to put your work where it will inevitably go into a white institutional space, it's inevitable. So you choose the parts of it that you're okay with displaying and that you're comfortable with displaying, because there's a language between insider and outsider that can only be decoded by you as an insider and by anybody else who relates to that work in the same way that you do. So I think you protect it you protect the spirituality of the work by knowing that whoever needs to see it in the way that it should be seen will understand it that way. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily, it goes in there protecting itself. You need to let it go to do what it needs to do, to work the way it needs to work. Because essentially we need to start debunking this idea that Black forms of spirituality are dark. They are, you know, all these dark and demonizing versions of what Blackness is, Black spirituality. They need to be kind of chopped up and just, you know, we need to lay that to waste because it's not true. And when you put them in museums and you put them in institutions which are white, then people start being like, oh, okay, so this is normal. In fact, I love what's happening right now where people are just making work about spirituality because now you're being bombarded. The chickens are coming home to roost, basically, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. Okay.
I couldn't agree more. There's a Mende quote that I love. I always read this at my talks, and it goes, "There is a thing passing in the sky. Some thick clouds surround it. The uninitiated sees nothing." That's so true. That's just what it is.
It's for you to see, you'll see it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Anybody else? You don't want to add anything, Deborah?
Well, no, I think I'll just say this too, because I think that idea about access, right? I think is what you're talking about. And there's always this, you know, urge that people want to feel like they want to know what's the secret behind this work that you've made. And I agree. It's sort of, you know, it's always interesting for me because I use beauty, right? Like sort of very seductive images, and that's part of the device, right? So if a person comes into this space and they just want to look at some like soothing water of the way, you know, or, you know, somebody taking a bath or, you know, beautiful flowers, and that's the level that they want to engage on, they can stay there, right? You know, when they delve deeper, then it becomes something else, which is, you know, hopefully what they want to do, right? But if they don't, then you could have gone in and had a pretty experience and leave. And that's on you, right? And then there's some parts that, yeah, like you don't necessarily have to give all of it away. I think I agree. The people who understand it will understand it. And that's fine, you know, and that's okay. I think there are codes to, you know, we can look at Picasso's work and not necessarily code it that way when it might very well be, right? All these like white European cultures have their own their own belief systems, right? That don't necessarily gel with what we think of as traditional either. So you know, you can, I think it's okay for us, right? Like you were saying, like why is it okay for some people to paint flowers and make beautiful work, but my work always has to look like pain? Like, why does it always have to look like that? Or it doesn't seem authentic, or it doesn't seem spiritual enough, or it's not, you know, so, and I really do like that idea in terms of this notion of white institutional spaces. Yeah, I mean, on some level, I think we are sort of infiltrating some of those spaces, and it's up to artists to, like you say, just sort of stand your ground and sort of show the work the way you believe it should be shown. And that's how you protect it. You protect it by not changing the work that you envision and you want to see, and sort of fighting for that authenticity in the work, and that it gets presented the way you want to. I'm sure, like, because we're all doing videos, so one of the things that always sort of happens is that they want to put your work on a little monitor sometimes, right? So, you know, like, you know, as opposed to like, can I get a room, please? You know, that for me, that was the nice thing about working with a space like Pam. You know, I've been so accustomed to everybody being like, oh, you want a monitor? And I was sort of, you know, sort of thinking like, well, can I get, you know, is a room possible? And they were like, yes. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, but those are the things. Or sometimes going like, I can't show that. If you're not going to project it, then I don't want to show that, right? At the same token, I make work that can be seen at different sizes. And then you know, and I'll be okay with that. But there's also holding your ground too, for sort of thinking about how you want the work to be presented and protecting it that way, you know, in a way, the message and this sort of sacredness of the message you want to put out.
Awesome. So Nikki Green, hey Nikki, thank you for joining us, has a question. I mean, it says it's for you, Deborah, but I feel like actually this is like an everybody question for real. Deborah seems to be tapping into a question that I have about how time operates for artists. How does photography versus film complicate or enrich your practice in understanding memory?
I mean, I can start. I guess for me, I think partly, you know, like you have an idea and you sort of go out to photograph it. Some projects need to be photos and some need to be video, and very rarely do they cross over. That project, What is the Value of Water, where she's using a bouquet, started out as a video installation. It was always meant to be moving to me. And then I took and something said, well, you know, take some stills too. So I took a series of still images to go with it. And that's probably the only project where I've ever had that kind of you know, combining both. But I think when you think about, for me then, the history of photography and then thinking about the addition of movement, if motion isn't necessarily adding like anything to the concept of it, then it doesn't need to move. But for me, time, when I'm doing time-based stuff, like sound is part of that time, and then as well as the video. And they're both time-based for me. And so I've been thinking more and more about this too, just because I'm thinking about the invisible part of it, right? So I've been doing this new work where I've been like extracting like the timeline. Like, so if you're editing in video, there's a timeline that's constructed, and sort of printing that out, right? Because, you know, when I edit, like a lot of times I'll use sound that's layered there, but you don't hear it. Like it's low. So it's not the sound that when you're in the space that you're encountering at first, but there is always, so in a lot of the video, the Rosby whistle, for instance, is throughout, almost like this heartbeat. There are parts where it's audible and then there are parts where it's not. But if I look at the timeline, I see it there, right? And so for me, it was kind of like, okay, like how can I, like, for me, it starts to function like a drawing as well. So, so yeah, that idea though of time is something that's fluid and you can play with it. And so with the still images, I can mix the narrative up. When I'm representing it, I can change the order of the stills, whereas the video is sort of like locked into a particular sequence. So yeah, time is this, it's just sort of this, it's fluid, even in the photo, right? Because the idea that the photo is just freezing this moment, and there's the perceived motion before, and then there's a motion that happened right after that split second of getting the image. So I don't know. So that's how I mean, I think of it with a lot of different layers.
I think you covered it. Yeah, I agree. So I can tell the work tells you what it wants. You know, sometimes I think about slowing things down. I've been seeing the whole world in slow motion. So a lot of my things have been in slow motion.
Right.
And so, you know, depends on how it comes to you.
Okay. I think I've already answered this one, so I agree.
Fair enough. I can't see the bottom for some reason. There was also a question in the chat that I saw that I probably won't be able to scroll to find. Okay. Hey, Sibilla's got a question. Do you think there is a correlation between our bodies being made of a majority of water? Is it a homecoming? Is it regenerative and rejuvenates your energy? I hear a strong spiritual relationship with water, full of respect and fear.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, the bodies, they live and then they go right back into this thing, right? So I agree. It sounded more of a statement, right? That I agree with what she said in terms of us being made of this thing, and how I see it, how it extends is that when we're no longer here, we just go back into the same energy or something.
And I think at this point, it's important to note that like my thinking about naming this water and time is not just about that it's time-based medium, but it's also that your work is well, I don't think it's not in gallery view, so they can only see me. So Delphine's doing this. So part of what I'm thinking about is that all of you are traversing time beyond just the obvious photo or video or sound. It's much more about connecting to this energy that exists beyond us and will exist long after we're gone, right? And thinking about what are the ways that we can represent that visually. Let's see.
Wait, I have an antidote to that, actually.
Yeah.
So there's a piece that was made, I think it was 2018, and I was going between showing you guys that piece and the one that I showed you now. And it's basically about a Xhosa myth, which is the clan of my people. And they speak about clans of our people being born out of water, being created as whole humans coming out of water to basically take care of the earth. And so I think across many cultures, but where there's stories like that, there's always something that's a base for it, and there's always some truth in it. So I think there is some truth in it. I just wanted to share that with you, that there are stories of people, whole adults, being born out of water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Last question from Quincy Arrington. Thanks for your patience, Quincy. What has the work made you, how has the work made you more sensitive about your body, if at all?
Definitely.
How?
You start to, I think the work, for me, when I'm making work, like I mentioned before, I'm starting to look at my existence in a different way. Like if you never question your existence and just listen to what society tells you, you can live your life in this way, right? But now I'm understanding, like I'm looking at the concept of body, like, you know, this body as this entity, you know, sometimes it really freaks me out. I think I started doing this when I was younger, because I would go on my balcony and I would think about, I would just look at the world, look at what was in front of me, and I'll start taking things away. And then, you know, what was here before this and this and this, and then you get caught in this abyss of nothingness. And then that scares you, right? Because there's always something, or is there, right? And then you start thinking about this cycle. So I say all that to say, it just makes me think about my existence and our existence as these breathing and living entities. Like I think about my body right now, my heart is beating. I'm not controlling my heartbeat. I'm not controlling my breathing. I'm not controlling the blood moving throughout my veins. This thing is beyond us. Like we're given this gift that functions on its own, basically, right? And so it makes me think about those things. So can I just have this body and just exist as how this society tells me to exist? Or is there something else that I could tap into that makes me start thinking more about my existence in a different way? So I use, you know, a whole, you know, whether it's like reading a bunch of different spiritual texts that kind of tap into this thing, or historical texts, or just paying attention sometimes to the energies that are around me in different spaces. I'm like one who lives on, I'm a very intuitive person, and I really listen to spirit, like whatever that means. And I follow this thing as I'm making work, as I'm moving around. It's the thing that makes me decide which way to go, right or left, you know? And so in those places, I think it's being conscious of your body as this entity that's existing, this living and breathing thing that is existing beyond your knowledge of how much we think we have so much control, but really we don't. You know, the control that we do have is how we care for the body. So something that I've been thinking about maybe I started really thinking about this, the point at which I was carrying a body within my body. When I first became a mother and had a body living within me, I was like, oh my God, what am I, everything, you know, I'm one of those people. So I'm like, oh my God, I have a living person inside of me that I'm responsible to make sure that they're growing and I'm nurturing them. So all of a sudden I really became hyper active, whatever, about what I was putting into my body and caring for my body. And it's never changed since then, you know. And not that you have to be in that position to think about that, but it's something to think about. Just as we're watering a plant, our bodies are, it functions, it gets tightened. Like we have to take care of these bodies. And I've been thinking about that so much over the years. And the more I think about, again, like, I'm making work and I'm thinking about this earth. I think about the earth in the same way. This thing that exists out of me is no difference between me and a tree, right? You know, and so, or me and the next person. And so, yeah, it's a level of care that I think is really necessary. You know, this is our gift from the great creator. So I have to think about this body. I can't just walk around not thinking about it. Yeah.
I think for me too, I think a lot, you know, we're filming most of, like, based on the work I'm seeing, most of us are filming outdoors as well. So, I mean, you know, if I decide to wade into water with a camera, and I have to sort of negotiate waves as I'm filming, like, you also are aware of your body in that space as well, right? You know, even in the very making of the work, it's not passive, you know, like, you're out in the sun, you're out in the elements. You know, in some cases you have to, like, move your body to, like, spaces that are not easily accessible to even capture the images that you're making, right? So on some level you are, you know, and then maybe you have to calm your breathing down to be able to get the footage that you want. I mean, sometimes it's literally that basic, but in those in those moments you are aware, you know, like when it rains, like, you know, if a storm is coming, you always, to me, I can always feel like the electricity in the air. Like, it's a shift, you know, like I would always joke and be like, oh, like, rain is coming. And people are like, what do you mean? I'm like, can't you smell it? Like, you know, you'd be like this, you know, so you in being, I think, making this work also does make you aware of those kinds of things. Your senses play into it. Like, you think about the smell of salt water. When you go to a freshwater area, you're like, oh, wait, this smells nothing like when I'm filming in one place or the other. So your senses, I think, too, also start to are more alive just because of the nature of the work.
Absolutely.
I think that I tend to think of the body as a vessel, and I don't really think that it belongs to me. It's just a vessel that's being brought to do something on this earth. And this vessel needs to nurture other vessels and nurture itself in order to keep doing the work that it needs to do on the earth that has been brought to do. So to be quite honest, I wasn't thinking like that until I turned, I think, 20, and this was 13 years ago. So for me, that was more than a decade ago. So that was, it feels like a very long time where I've been thinking of my body as a vessel and it having its own owners and me not being the actual owner. So it hasn't actually changed. For me, I've just been thinking about how to make sure that my mental state is in the right place in order to take care of everything else. Because if your head isn't right, everything else isn't right. You're not able to do the work that you need to do. That's it. So I don't really worry about, the superficial things, which is like, oh, I've got to exercise. I don't look cute in the video anymore. This isn't cool. I don't really care. I don't really care what I look like as long as the subject matter is there's some dignity and integrity maintained. Right. That's it for me.
I think that's actually a great place to end it. And I didn't forget, please everybody wish Buhle and happy belated birthday. It was her birthday on Monday.
Oh.
Thank you.
And again, thank you. People just always driving by my house with like all the 808s in the trunk. It's amazing. Anyway, thank you all again so much for your time this afternoon. So deeply appreciate it. I'm so grateful to be in conversation with each of you individually, much less to have this really incredibly generative conversation that we've had this afternoon. Thank you to everyone who has joined us and toughed it out for these 90 or so minutes. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your deep engagement in the chat. And I'm very grateful. We will see you again next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.